He used to stop at the corner bakery every morning, not because the coffee was good, it wasn't, but because it was open early, and the woman behind the counter never asked him anything. There was a window by the door. Through it, he could see the park across the street, always empty except for one man who fed the pigeons at 6:47 a.m. He never wondered about that man. There wasn't time for wondering. The coffee was always too hot to drink right away, so he'd carry it 3 blocks to the station, and by the time he reached the platform, it would be exactly the right temperature. He had the timing down. He had everything down. His day was a sequence of calibrated intervals, meetings that bled into other meetings, lunch eaten while reading emails, the commute home, time to avoid the worst of the crowd. People said things like driven and committed. He accepted these words the way you accept rain. There was a photo on his desk, a small one in a frame his daughter had decorated with stickers when she was 7. She was 14 now. The stickers had faded, some peeling at the edges. In the photo, she's holding a goldfish in a plastic bag from the fair, grinning with that specific joy children have before they learn that joy requires justification. He looked at that photo sometimes between emails, not for long, just a glance, the way you glance at a clock. He told himself he was building something, security, the kind of life where she wouldn't have to worry the way he had worried when his father worked 2 jobs and still couldn't keep the heat on past March. He remembered the cold. He remembered his mother's face when she opened bills. So he worked with the kind of intensity that looks like passion from the outside but feels like fear from the inside. His wife used to wait up for him. In the beginning, she'd be on the couch with a book, and when he came through the door, she'd look up and smile. But somewhere along the way, the couch started to be empty when he came home, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. He'd stand in the kitchen eating something cold from a container and tell himself this was temporary, just until the next promotion, just until things settled. Things never settled. She stopped asking him to come to bed at a reasonable hour, stopped suggesting weekend trips, stopped mentioning the concert tickets that went unused because of a client dinner he couldn't move. He noticed her stopping the way you notice the absence of a sound you'd gotten used to, but he didn't say anything. He thought there would be time to say something later. His daughter learned not to expect him at her events, the recitals, the games, the small ceremonies that populate childhood. He'd promise he'd be there and he'd mean it, but then something would come up, something always came up, and he'd send a text. She'd text back a thumbs up, no accusations, just a thumbs up. He told himself she understood. On her 16th birthday, he came home late again. There was cake in the fridge, already cut, the candles removed. He ate it standing up, alone, and it tasted like nothing. The promotions came, the raises came. He moved into a bigger office with a view people remarked on. He bought a nicer car, a bigger house. He checked the boxes he'd been told to check, and each box checked felt like progress. But sometimes late at night, sitting in traffic or staring at spreadsheets, he'd feel something beneath the efficiency, a hollow sensation like biting into fruit and finding it empty. He ignored it. There was always something else to focus on. His father died on a Tuesday in October, heart attack, quick, they said. At the funeral, people spoke about his father with a warmth that surprised him. They told stories he'd never heard. A neighbor talked about how his father used to shovel her driveway every winter without being asked. His father's best friend cried openly and said he'd never known a more generous person. He stood there listening and realized he barely knew the man they were describing. His father had been a distant figure to him, tired, worn, someone to escape from, not toward, and now he was gone, and all that was left were these stories from strangers. He went back to work on Thursday. His daughter left for college on a Sunday in August. He helped carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs. She was nervous, excited, trying to seem older than she was. He wanted to say something that would matter, something she'd remember, but he didn't know how, so he asked if she had enough hangers. She said yes. They hugged briefly, and then he drove home. The house felt different after that, not emptier exactly, just more honest. His wife started going to a yoga class on Wednesday evenings, then a book club on Saturdays. She made friends he never met. They still lived in the same house, still slept in the same bed. But somewhere along the way, they had become polite strangers. They talked about logistics, bills, repairs, schedules, but never about anything that required them to be vulnerable. One night she told him she was thinking about visiting her sister in Portland for a few weeks, maybe longer. She said it calmly. He said, okay. She looked at him for a long moment, and he realized she'd been hoping he'd ask her to stay, but he didn't know how to ask for things like that. She left on a Thursday. He came home to a note on the counter. It said she needed time to figure some things out. She signed it with her initial. Not love, just the letter M. He stood in the kitchen, holding the note, and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a distant recognition that something had ended and he hadn't noticed when. The years continued. He kept working because he didn't know what else to do. People still said he was driven, but the word felt different now, less like a compliment, more like a diagnosis. He started noticing things he'd never noticed before. The way light came through the office window at 4 p.m, turning everything gold for exactly 11 minutes. The sound of rain on the roof of his car. The fact that the barista had a small scar above her left eyebrow and always hummed while she made drinks. These details felt important, though he couldn't say why. His daughter called every few weeks. The conversations were brief. She'd tell him about her job, her apartment. He'd tell her he was proud of her. She'd say thanks. There was affection in these exchanges, but no intimacy. He wanted to ask her real things, whether she was happy, whether she ever felt lost, whether she remembered the goldfish from the fair, but he didn't know how to begin. One Saturday, he drove past the park near the old bakery. The man who used to feed the pigeons wasn't there anymore. He parked and walked to the bench where the man used to sit. There was graffiti on it now, initials inside a heart. He sat down and looked at the empty space where the pigeons used to gather. He thought about the coffee he used to carry, always too hot to drink. The meetings that had seemed so urgent. The decade of weekends spent preparing for a future that had somehow already arrived and passed him by. He thought about his daughter's recitals, the ones he'd missed. He couldn't remember now what had been so important. A presentation, maybe, a client call. It was all gone, whatever it was. But so were the recitals. He thought about his wife and the way she used to look at him in the beginning, like he was someone worth waiting for. He wondered when she'd stopped looking at him like that. Sitting on that bench, he realized he had spent his entire life preparing for a moment of arrival that never came. There was no finish line, no point at which the work would be done and the real living could begin. He had been waiting for permission to stop, to rest, to be present. But no one was ever going to give him that permission. He was 63 years old. healthy, financially secure, respected in his field, by most measures successful. But he could not name a single moment in the last 30 years when he had been fully present for his own life. The park was empty except for a young couple on the far bench, leaning into each other, laughing about something he couldn't hear. He watched them for a moment and felt a kind of grief he had no language for. He stood up, walked back to his car, drove home to the house that was too big for one person. He made dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, scrolling through news he wouldn't remember. Later, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought about the man who used to feed the pigeons. He wondered if that man had been happy, if the simplicity of that routine had contained a kind of wisdom he'd been too busy to recognize. He would never know. The next morning, he woke up at 6:15, the way he always did. He made coffee. He checked his email. He began the day the same way he'd begun every day for as long as he could remember. Because even now, even knowing what he knew, he didn't know how to do it differently. The waiting had become the life.